Welcome to the Greenfield Report with Henry R. Greenfield, your gateway to understanding today's geopolitical landscape. With 50 years of experience across 10 countries, Henry shares expert insights on world affairs, offering practical solutions and engaging guest perspectives. Dive into the Greenfield Report for lively discussions on the issues that matter.
This is Henry R. Greenfield, and welcome to the Greenfield Report. On this first edition of the Greenfield Report, we will be focusing on the past two tumultuous weeks between the U.S. and Ukraine, and Europe on the other side, that is now extending into the third week. Not to make too large of a statement, but there seems to be no end in sight in the devolving relationship between the U.S. and the rest of the democracies in the Western world. We will kick it off with a recap of how we got here and where do we think this is going to go in the near future as we enter, as often is the case with Donald Trump, into ever more uncharted territory and unprecedented actions. On Valentine's Day, JD Vance, on his maiden trip to Europe as vice president, kicked off what is being called the beginning of the end of Europe's American century, with a lecture to the Europeans on censorship. He followed that up by meeting with the far-right AfD party while in Germany, literally endorsing them for the upcoming election, which I must add, did not result in victory for the AfD. In fact, in the first of many rebukes of Trump and Vance and their attacks on Europe, Germany chose a center-right leader who will put together a coalition that the U.S. would term center-left. In short, more of a Biden on supporting the economy than a Trump on taking apart the federal government. From there, it quickly went downhill with Captain Pete, who we call Captain Pete, now Secretary of Defense Hegseth, telling the Euros that Ukraine would not be getting into NATO as part of any peace deal, nor would they get anything close to their 2014 borders, which was before the first invasion by Putin of Ukraine, taking Crimea. Oh, and Europe would also have to put troops on the ground to guarantee whatever the peace plan is as the U.S. was out. And by extension, in effect saying no Article 5 would be available even for other places in the future. So the bottom line here is that Hegseth, like Vance, made a major change in U.S. policy. Throughout the past 2 weeks, Europeans have gone through paroxysm and spasms of WTF. They knew Trump was not pro-Ukraine, but all Putin talking points and JD attacking Europe coming at once was really quite too much for them. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., Trump doubled down, calling Zelensky a dictator, said he had no cards to play, which he repeated, by the way, in the infamous argument and fight that they had in shouting match in the Oval Office, was a nobody, would not be included, in fact, nor would Europe in any peace negotiations with Russia. Trump dispatched Marco Rubio to Saudi Arabia, of all places, to meet with Russia to start the peace discussions in a bizarre moment of the two meeting in the desert discussing a European war, the largest confrontation since World War II, which, by the way, at that time, Saudi was nothing. Now, as a close friend and ally of Trump, Saudi and MBS were trying to call the shots on the future of Europe. As the cherry on the pie, Trump made up lie after lie on how the U.S. had contributed practically all of the support to Ukraine, that Europe had given loans, not grants, and that the U.S. had ponied up over $300 billion, while Europe only a fraction of that. Of course, none of this was true, and Europe had to act and began to realize that the U.S. might no longer be their partner, and in fact, could be a rival or even an enemy in the future, and that future might start now. Little did they know that this was about to happen. Needless to say, that didn't go well, and the Euros regrouped and sent their two nuclear powers, France and the UK, to Washington to meet with what is now seen as Putin's best friend, Donald Trump, to soften him up and remind him that his interests lie with Europe and not with Russia. Day after day, this went forward, carefully and sometimes forcefully. Macron of France and then Starmer of the UK, who sweetened the pot even further with a personal letter from King Charles inviting Trump to a state dinner. Unprecedented, historical, they proclaimed, and Trump seemed to be truly flattered, but didn't give in too much. All was set for Friday as Team Euro plus the UK plus Canada, which had supported Ukraine at the 3-year invasion anniversary conference in Kyiv, had successfully lined up everyone to support Ukraine and Zelensky. Zelensky went to Washington to sign the rare earths deal, which was quite weak, but everybody said it was a start, and I was set to call this a triumph, a tour de force for Team Euro. Then it not only blew up, but it has devolved ever further, moment by moment, into a split that is looking more and more irreparable, and for at least as long as Trump and the far right in the U.S. occupy the presidency and the rest of the seats of power, somewhat, it looks like, permanently. Zelensky was not only summarily kicked out of the White House after getting into a shouting match with Trump and Vance on global TV over not saying sorry and thanking Trump enough, it was followed up, since by then, with every Trump acolyte who have doubled down on all the Sunday shows as well as the immediate aftermath, calling Trump a hero for the American people. Meanwhile, literally every Western democracy in the world, as far off as Australia and New Zealand, joined the Euros in Canada, all in effect condemning the mugging of Zelensky by Trump and his attack dog, JD Vance. Today, the Euros are meeting in London, all pledging unconditional support of Ukraine and Zelensky. Speaking of King Charles, he has already met with Zelensky. I guess Zelensky didn't get a state dinner, but I imagine they'd had something there at Windsor Castle. Maybe it was high tea, as anyone as the stakes could understand could not be higher. As I said, we can't cover it all, and predictions are out the window. But if you check what we have posted on Quora, there are a host of steps that will happen, but no assurance that any of them can or work as a permanent solution. So what will happen now? The result of today's summit in London, which was clearly led by Prime Minister Starmer, was to counter Trump and the U.S. without precluding future cooperation. Starmer in particular offered several billion in loans, 5,000 missiles, and very strong support. The two leaders of this group, once again, will be Macron and Starmer, who will become the leaders of what they are calling the coalition of the willing, meaning those who will put together proposals that will be backed by money and military. Why the willing? Because simply the U.S. cannot be trusted, and there are Putin puppets to deal with, such as Orban of Hungary, who would clearly veto any kind of NATO action, not just the U.S. The bottom line, the end of U.S. hegemony and leadership has taken its first step forward towards an independent Europe. Europe and the UK, along with Canada, and even Australia and New Zealand, do not want this to happen fast. However, the resolve on their side seems clear. Trump has thrown out 80 years of American leadership in the free world, and it may never come back. He can go on every TV program and preach, as they say, to the converted on the MAGA side, and the Democrats may currently be bereft of leadership. But the rest of the democratic nations of the world are moving on, with or without Trump and the United States. For Trump, Ukraine is not important, and the Euros all get it. For Europeans, they understand they cannot lose Ukraine to Russia, and they have to stand up to not just Putin, but also to Donald Trump in the United States. It has begun.
Thank you for joining us on the Greenfield Report with Henry R. Greenfield. We hope today's insights into the ever-shifting geopolitical landscape have sparked your curiosity and broadened your perspective. Stay connected with us for more in-depth discussions and expert solutions. Until next time, keep exploring the world beyond the headlines.